The knife of pain woke Nora Keller before her alarm did, a sharp cramp shooting through her feet as she peeled herself off the thin mattress. She had worked a double the night before, and her body had not forgiven her for it. Rain hammered the window of her small apartment, and the clock on the wall told her she was already late. She dressed in the dark, tied her hair back, and pushed her tired legs toward another shift she could not afford to miss. The diner sat on the corner of a street that most people avoided after dark. It was a narrow place with cracked booths and a flickering sign, but it was steady work, and Nora needed steady more than she needed anything else. Her landlord had left a note on her door that morning, and she had not opened it. She already knew what it said. Rent was late again, and patience was running out. By the time midnight came, the diner was nearly empty. The cook had gone home. Only Molly Hart, the other waitress, stayed behind the counter, wiping the same spot for the third time. Molly was younger than Nora, quick to laugh and quick to complain, and she was already reaching for her coat. "You should go home too," Molly said. "Nobody's coming in this weather." "I'll close up," Nora answered. "Go on, your bus is coming." Molly did not argue. She grabbed her bag and hurried out into the storm, leaving Nora alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the drum of the rain. Nora carried the last of the dishes to the back, stacked them, and reached for her own coat. She was thinking about the note on her door, about the numbers that never added up when she heard it. A sound came from the alley behind the diner. It was not the wind. It was heavier than that, a wet dragging noise followed by a low groan. Nora froze with her coat halfway on. Everything in her told her to lock the door and walk out the front. That was the smart thing. That was what anyone with sense would do in this part of the city at this hour in this rain. But the groan came again, weaker now, and something in it reached past her fear. She grabbed the flashlight from beneath the register and pushed open the back door. The rain hit her face at once. She swept the light across the alley, past the dumpster and the broken crates, until it landed on a shape slumped against the wall. It was a man. He was large, dressed in a dark suit that clung to him from the rain, and one hand was pressed hard against his side. Even in the dim light she could see that his fingers were dark with something that was not water. "Oh no," she whispered. She should have called for help. She should have run inside and locked the door. Instead she moved toward him because that was who she was, and she had never learned how to be anyone else. "Hey," she said, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me? Are you hurt?" His eyes opened. They were sharp even now, even half closed with exhaustion, and they fixed on her with a strange, careful weight. He looked at her the way a person looks at a thing they do not understand, as if he were trying to decide what she wanted from him. "I'm not going to hurt you," Nora said. "You're bleeding. Let me help you inside." He said nothing. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might refuse. Then his weight shifted, and she understood he was too weak to argue. She got her shoulder under his arm and pulled. He was heavy, far heavier than she expected, and it took everything she had to lift him. Somehow, step by dragging step, she got him through the back door and into the empty diner. She lowered him into the nearest booth. Under the light he looked worse, his face pale, his lips gray. But his eyes never left her. They followed her every movement with a quiet, unblinking focus that would have frightened her if she had let herself think about it. Nora did not let herself think about it. She grabbed the first aid kit from under the counter, along with a stack of clean towels, and knelt beside him again. "I need to see the wound," she said. "May I?" A slow nod was all he gave her. She pulled his hand aside gently and lifted the torn fabric of his shirt. The cut along his side was long and ugly, but when she pressed a towel to it, she could tell it was not as deep as the amount of blood had made her fear. Someone had hurt him, that much was clear, but he would live if the bleeding stopped. "This is going to sting," she warned, and she cleaned it as carefully as she could. He did not make a sound. Most people would have shouted or pulled away. He only watched her, breathing slow and steady, his gaze moving from her hands to her face and back again. "You have a light touch," he said. His voice was low and rough, but there was something controlled underneath it, something that did not match a man bleeding in an alley. "I used to want to be a nurse," Nora said, keeping her eyes on her work. "Life had other plans. Life usually does." She taped a clean pad over the wound and sat back on her heels. "You need a hospital. That should really have stitches." "No hospital." He said it flatly, and the way he said it left no room for discussion. "No doctors, no questions." Nora studied him for a long moment. A sensible woman would have insisted. A sensible woman would have asked who did this to him and why, would have wondered why a man in an expensive suit was bleeding behind a run-down diner at midnight with a face that gave nothing away. But Nora was tired, and she was kind, and she had learned long ago that some people carried things they could not explain. "Okay," she said simply. "No questions, but you're not going anywhere until you've eaten something and gotten some strength back. You've lost a lot of blood." Something flickered across his face then, something she could not read. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. He was quiet as she rose and went behind the counter. She heated a bowl of soup that was left from the dinner service and poured a strong cup of coffee, and she set them both in front of him with a spoon and a napkin, the way she would for any customer. "Eat," she said. "It's on me." He looked at the food, then at her. "You don't know who I am." "No," she agreed, "and you don't have to tell me. You're a person who's hurt, and I'm a person who can help. That's enough for tonight." For a long moment he did not move. Then slowly he picked up the spoon. He ate carefully at first, then with more hunger, as if he had not eaten in a long time. Nora sat across from him, sipping her own coffee, letting the silence be. She did not fill it with chatter. She simply let him be a man eating soup in a warm room while the rain fell outside. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Nora," she smiled a little. "Nora Keller, and you don't have to tell me yours. I know the rules now. No questions." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "You're a strange woman, Nora Keller." "I've been told." He leaned his head back against the booth and closed his eyes for a moment, and Nora took the chance to look at him properly. He was older than her, though not by much, with dark hair going gray at the edges and a face that must have been handsome before life carved lines into it. His hands were the thing that stood out most. They were strong and scarred, the hands of a man who had done hard things, yet he had held the spoon carefully, almost politely, as if good manners were a habit he could not shake. "You keep looking at the door," Nora said gently. "Are you expecting someone?" His eyes opened at once, alert again. "Why do you ask?" "Because you flinch every time a car passes." She kept her voice calm. "You don't have to tell me. But if someone is looking for you and they find you here, I'd like to know whether to be worried." For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he shook his head. "No one will find me here, not tonight. They think I'm somewhere else." He studied her again with that careful, weighing look. "You notice the door. Most people wouldn't. You pay attention." "When you work nights in a place like this, you learn to," Nora said. "You learn to read people, to know who's had a hard day and who's had a hard life, to know who might cause trouble before they do." "And what do you read in me?" She considered him honestly. "A hard life," she said. "And a man who's very tired of carrying it alone." Something shifted in his face, a flicker of surprise so quick she almost missed it. He looked away from her, out the rain-streaked window, and for a moment the silence between them felt heavier than before. "You should be careful reading people so well," he said at last. "It's a gift that can get a person into trouble." "So can kindness, apparently," Nora said with a small smile. "You've warned me about that twice now." The corner of his mouth moved again, closer to a real smile this time. "Maybe I'm just not used to it." "Everyone deserves a little of it," she said. "Even strangers who won't tell me their names." He finished the soup and drank the coffee, and slowly the color returned to his face. As the warmth reached him, Nora watched some of the tension leave his shoulders, though his eyes never fully lost their sharpness. She had the odd feeling that he was memorizing her, filing away every small kindness as if he needed to keep a record of them. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "You saw the blood, you knew I was trouble, most people would have run." Nora considered the question honestly. "Because you were hurt and I could do something about it. I don't need a bigger reason than that." She shrugged. "People walked past me plenty of times when I needed help. I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to be one of those people." He set down the empty cup and looked at her with an expression she could not name. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something deeper and more troubled than that, as if her simple answer had disturbed something he had thought was settled inside him. "You should be careful who you help," he said quietly. "Kindness like yours can be dangerous in a city like this." "Maybe," Nora said, "but I'd rather be careful and kind than careful and cold." Outside, the rain began to ease. The man moved to stand, testing his side with a wince, and Nora rose quickly to steady him. He waved her off gently, finding his balance on his own. "I can manage now," he said. "You've done more than enough." "At least take an umbrella," she offered. "There's an old one behind the counter." "No," he straightened his ruined jacket as if it still mattered how he looked. "I've kept you long enough. It's late. You should be home." Nora walked him to the front door, unlocking it and holding it open. The night air was cold and clean after the storm. He paused on the threshold and turned to look at her one last time, and for a moment the hard shell around him seemed to crack, just slightly, just enough for her to see something lonely underneath. "Thank you, Nora Keller," he said. "I won't forget this." "You don't owe me anything," she said. "Just take care of yourself." He stepped out into the dark and was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the street as quickly as if he had never been there at all. Nora watched the empty sidewalk for a moment, then locked the door and turned back to clean up. That was when she saw it. Tucked halfway under his empty coffee cup was a folded bill. She lifted the cup and drew it out, and her breath caught. It was not a normal tip. It was more money than she made in a month of doubles, folded neatly and left without a word. For a moment she simply stared at it. Then she hurried to the door and unlocked it again, stepping out into the street, looking left and right for any sign of him. But the man was gone. There was no one there, only wet pavement shining under the streetlights and the distant sound of a car somewhere far away. Nora went back inside, holding the money, her heart beating fast for reasons she could not fully explain. She thought about the numbers that never added up, about the note on her door, about the way this money could keep a roof over her head for weeks. And she thought about the man's eyes, and the way he had watched her, and the strange warning he had left her with. Part of her wanted to refuse it. She had not helped him for money. She had helped him because he was hurt, and because leaving him in the cold would have haunted her for the rest of her life. Taking his money felt like turning a kindness into a transaction, and that sat wrong with her. But another part of her, the tired and frightened part that knew exactly how close she was to losing everything, folded the bill and kept it. Pride was a luxury, and she could not afford luxuries. She thought about the way he had eaten, slow and careful, as if he had not truly rested in a very long time. She thought about how he had flinched at passing cars and how his eyes had never quite let go of the door. Whoever he was, he lived a life of watching over his shoulder, and that was no life at all. She found herself hoping, foolishly, that he would be all right. She did not know his name. She did not know what he had done or who had hurt him. She only knew that she had helped a stranger in the rain, and that something about the night felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. What Nora Keller did not know, what she could not have guessed as she stood there in the empty diner counting a stranger's money, was that the man she had just fed and bandaged was Matteo Rizzo. She did not know that his name was spoken in whispers across the city, that grown men grew quiet when he entered a room, that he ran the most powerful and feared crime family the city had ever known. She did not know that someone had tried to end his life that night, that they had come very close, and that they were still out there, searching for him. She did not know that by opening that back door, by kneeling beside a bleeding stranger and choosing kindness over caution, she had stepped straight into the center of a storm far larger than the one that had just passed. She only knew that her feet hurt, that the rain had stopped, and that a stranger had thanked her and promised not to forget. Nora tucked the money into her pocket, finished closing the diner, and walked home through the quiet streets. She told herself it was over, that she would never see the man again, that this was simply one of those strange nights that the city sometimes handed to people who worked too late. She was wrong about all of it, but that night, walking home under the clearing sky, she let herself believe it. She let herself feel, for the first time in a long time, that maybe doing a small good thing had mattered. She had no idea how much it would come to matter, or what it would cost, or how deeply the fate of the city's most feared man had just become tangled with the life of a tired waitress who only wanted to be kind. The storm had passed, but another was already beginning, and Nora Keller was standing right in its path. The eviction notice was gone. Nora stood outside her apartment door 3 days later, staring at the clean wood where the yellow paper had been taped, and for a moment she could not make sense of it. She had been dreading this exact moment all week, had spent the walk home rehearsing what she would say to her landlord, how she would beg for one more week. But the notice was simply gone, as if it had never existed at all. She let herself inside and found an envelope on the floor, pushed under the door. Inside was a receipt from the rental office. Her rent had been paid in full, not just this month but the 2 months she owed behind it. The balance read 0. Nora sat down slowly on the edge of her bed, the receipt trembling in her hand. She had not paid it. She did not have that kind of money, even with the stranger's tip. Someone had walked into that office and cleared her debt, and only one person in the world had any reason to. "It can't be," she whispered, but she knew it could. She told herself there was a mistake. She told herself it was some clerical error, some mix-up that would be corrected. But the next morning at the diner, the strangeness continued. There was a man who came in every few days, a heavy-set regular named Dwyer who liked to make Nora's shifts miserable. He complained about everything, left no tip, and had a habit of grabbing her wrist when she tried to clear his plate, holding on a beat too long, smiling at her discomfort. She had complained to the owner, Hank, more than once, but Hank only shrugged and said a paying customer was a paying customer. Dwyer did not come in that day, or the next. Molly mentioned it first, leaning against the counter during a slow hour. "Have you noticed," she said, "that awful man hasn't been around all week, the grabby one, thank goodness." "I noticed," Nora said carefully. "Maybe he finally found somewhere else to be terrible." Molly laughed and went back to her tables. But Nora did not laugh. She remembered the way the stranger had watched her, the way his eyes had missed nothing. She remembered him saying that kindness like hers could be dangerous, and she began to feel the first cold thread of understanding, the sense that a door she had opened 3 nights ago had not closed behind her the way she thought. There was a black car, too. She first saw it on Tuesday, parked across the street from the diner, its windows dark, its engine quiet. She thought nothing of it at first, but it was there again on Wednesday and again on Thursday, always in the same spot, always empty as far as she could tell. On Friday she saw it parked outside her apartment building when she got home, and that was when the cold thread became a knot in her stomach. She was being watched. She did not know whether to be frightened or grateful, and that uncertainty was its own kind of fear. The answer came on Saturday night. The diner was quiet, the last hour of her shift crawling by when the bell above the door rang. Nora looked up and her breath caught in her throat. It was him. He looked entirely different from the man she had dragged in from the rain. The suit was new and perfectly cut, dark and elegant, and he moved without the slightest sign of injury. His hair was combed back, his face clean-shaven, and he carried himself with a calm authority that filled the small diner the moment he stepped inside. 2 men entered behind him and stopped near the door, standing with their hands folded, their eyes scanning the room. They did not sit. They did not order. They simply waited, and Nora understood at once that they were there for him. He crossed to the counter and sat on the same stool near the register, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Hello, Nora," he said. For a moment she could not speak, then she found her voice. "You paid my rent." "I did. And the man who used to bother me, Dwyer, he's gone. He won't trouble you again." He said it simply, without any threat in his voice, which somehow made it more chilling. "You'll never have to think about him." Nora set down the cloth she had been holding. Her hands were not quite steady. "Who are you?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her, and she had the sense that he was deciding how much of the truth she could bear. "My name is Matteo Rizzo," he said at last. The name meant nothing to her at first. Then she saw the way Molly, coming out from the back, stopped dead the instant she heard it, her face going pale. She saw the way Hank appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiped his hands, and quietly disappeared again without a word. She saw the 2 men by the door straighten slightly at the sound of it, and she understood that this name meant everything to everyone in the city except her. "You're afraid of me now," Matteo observed, watching her face. "You've realized who I am." "I've realized," Nora said slowly, "that everyone else is afraid of you. I'm still deciding for myself." Something moved behind his eyes, that flicker of surprise she had seen the first night. "You're an unusual woman." "You keep telling me that." She lifted her chin. "Mr. Rizzo, I appreciate what you did with my rent. I do, but I can't accept it, and I can't have you paying off my debts or making people disappear. That's not the kind of help I want." He tilted his head, genuinely puzzled. "You would rather be thrown out of your home. You would rather that man kept putting his hands on you." "I would rather solve my own problems," she said. "The way I always have. I helped you because you needed it, not because I wanted anything back. If you pay me, if you owe me, then it wasn't kindness anymore. It was a trade, and I don't want to trade with you." Matteo Rizzo was quiet for a very long time. In all his years, in all the rooms he had walked into, no one had ever refused what he offered. People begged him for favors. People schemed for the smallest scrap of his attention. And here was a tired waitress in a worn apron telling him she wanted nothing from him at all, and meaning it. It unsettled him more deeply than any enemy ever had. "You confuse me," he admitted, and it was clear the admission cost him something. "That's all right," Nora said, and to her own surprise she smiled a little. "You confuse me too." He almost smiled back. Instead he reached into his jacket and set a card on the counter, plain and white, with only a phone number printed on it. "Keep this," he said. "I know you don't want my money. I know you don't want my help. But the world I live in doesn't care what you want. You saved my life, Nora Keller, and there are people who would use that against me if they knew. If you are ever in danger, if anyone ever comes to you asking questions about that night, you call this number, day or night. Do you understand? You're frightening me now." "Good," he said quietly. "A little fear will keep you careful. I never wanted my world to touch yours, but it already has, and there's no undoing it. The most I can do now is make sure it doesn't cost you." Nora looked at the card, then at him. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "That's exactly why," he said, and he did not explain further. He rose from the stool, buttoned his jacket, and looked at her one more time. In the harsh diner light he seemed both powerful and terribly alone, a man surrounded by people who feared him and served him, but who did not, she suspected, ever simply talk to him the way she was doing now. "Take the card, Nora," he said. "That's all I ask." She hesitated. Then she picked it up and slipped it into her apron pocket. "Fine, but only because you asked, not because I'm planning to use it." "That's all I need." He turned to go, then paused. "The rent stays paid. Consider it not a payment but an apology for the trouble my world is about to bring to your door. You can hate me for it if you like, but you'll keep your home." Before she could argue, he walked out, his two silent men falling into step behind him. The black car she had seen all week pulled up to the curb, and he stepped into it, and it drove away into the night. Molly rushed to her side the moment the door closed. "Do you know who that was?" she hissed, her eyes wide. "Do you have any idea? That's Matteo Rizzo. People whisper his name. My cousin says he runs half the city and not the half you read about in the papers. Nora, how do you know him? How does he know you?" "I don't know him," Nora said faintly. "I just helped him once. He was hurt. I didn't know who he was." Molly stared at her as if she had grown a second head. "You helped Matteo Rizzo, and you just told him to his face that you didn't want his money." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "People have vanished for far less." "He didn't seem angry," Nora said, though her heart was pounding now. "He seemed surprised, like no one had ever said no to him before." "Because no one ever has," Molly whispered, and lived to talk about it. The rest of the shift passed in a blur, but the danger Matteo had warned her about arrived sooner than she expected. It was nearly closing time when the bell rang again. A man came in alone, thin and pale, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee, and Nora poured it while trying to ignore the way his gaze followed her. "Slow night," he said pleasantly. "Usually is this late," Nora answered. "I hear you had an interesting visitor recently." He stirred his coffee slowly, not drinking it. "Big man, nice suit, came in a few nights back maybe, bit worse for wear." Nora's hands went still. She made herself keep wiping the counter. "We get all kinds in here. I don't remember anyone like that." "No," the man's smile widened. "That's strange. Someone told me a man came through here who needed a little help. I'm trying to find him. Old friend of mine. I'd hate to think he was hurt and no one looked after him." Every instinct in Nora screamed at her. This was no friend. This was one of the people Matteo had warned her about, and he was sitting 3 feet away, watching her face for the smallest crack. "I'm sorry," she said, keeping her voice light and tired. "I wish I could help, but it's just me and Molly most nights, and we see so many people they all blur together. Nobody like that stands out to me." The man studied her for a long, silent moment. Then he set down some coins, far too many for a coffee, and stood. "If your memory improves," he said, "I'll be around. A person can earn a lot for a good memory, and a person can lose a lot for a bad one." He walked out without touching his coffee. Nora stood frozen behind the counter, her heart slamming against her ribs, and understood with terrible clarity that Matteo had not been exaggerating. His world had found her already. She slipped her hand into her apron pocket and closed her fingers around the small white card, and for the first time she was glad she had kept it. Nora finished her shift in a daze. She walked home that night acutely aware of every shadow, every parked car, every set of footsteps behind her. The card sat in her pocket like a hot coal. She had wanted nothing to do with his world, and yet here it was, wrapping around her life like a vine she had not planted and could not pull free. At home she took the card out and looked at it under the lamp. Just a phone number, nothing else. She thought about throwing it away. She thought about calling it right then and demanding he leave her alone for good. In the end she did neither. She set it on her nightstand and lay awake for a long time, listening to the ordinary sounds of her building, wondering how her small, careful life had become tangled with the most dangerous man in the city. She did not know that far across town, in a room she could not imagine, Matteo Rizzo was also awake. He sat alone by a window that overlooked the whole glittering city, a glass in his hand that he had not touched, thinking about a waitress who had refused his money and read his loneliness in a single glance. He had spent his life among people who wanted things from him. He did not know what to do with a person who did not. Across the room, near the door, stood Vince Palermo, the one man in the world Matteo trusted without question. Vince had been at his side for 20 years, steady and loyal, the only person who could speak plainly to him without fear. He watched his old friend stare out at the city and finally broke the silence. "You went back to that diner," Vince said. It was not a question. "I did." "For a waitress." Vince shook his head slowly. "Mateo, half the city is trying to work out who pulled you out of that alley alive. You should be putting distance between yourself and her, not walking through the front door in a suit everyone recognizes." "I know what I should do," Mateo said quietly. "Then why?" Mateo was silent for a moment. "Because she asked for nothing. Do you understand what that means, Vince? In our whole lives, have we ever met a single person who wanted nothing?" Vince did not answer, because they both knew they had not. "Someone tried to end me that night," Mateo went on, his voice hardening. "Someone who knew where I would be. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from the street, it comes from clothes. From inside." His eyes narrowed as he watched the lights of the city. "Find out who talked, quietly, trust no one but me, not the captains, not the old guard, no one." Vince frowned. "You think one of ours sold you out?" "I think someone did," Mateo said. "And until I know who, everyone is a suspect, including the people I'd least want to doubt." He turned from the window at last, his jaw set. "And put a watch on the woman, discreet. She's not to know. If my enemies are smart, and they are, it won't take them long to find her. She's the one thread that leads back to that night, and I won't have her paying for a kindness." "That's a lot of care for a stranger," Vince said carefully. Mateo did not reply. He told himself he had done what he needed to do. He had paid his debt, warned her of the danger, given her a way to reach him. That was the end of it. He would keep his distance now. He would let her return to her small, ordinary life, and he would return to his large and terrible one, and their paths would never cross again. He was as wrong about that as she was. Because someone had seen him bleed that night. Someone had wanted him gone and had failed, and was even now searching for any thread that could lead them back to him. And a man like Mateo Rizzo did not survive by leaving loose ends. The problem was that Nora Keller had become the loosest end of all, and his enemies were far better at finding weaknesses than he was at hiding them. The storm Nora had felt beginning 3 nights ago was gathering strength. And very soon, it would arrive at her door with a force that no paid rent and no phone number could hold back. The hand clamped over Nora's mouth before she could scream. She had been walking home from the late shift, cutting through the quiet street she always took when they came out of the dark. 2 men, moving fast, one seizing her arm and the other covering her mouth, dragging her back toward a waiting van with its side door open like a mouth. Her keys fell from her fingers and clattered on the pavement. She fought, twisting and kicking, but they were strong and practiced, and her heels found only air. "Quiet," one of them hissed against her ear. "Somebody wants to talk to you about your friend Rizzo. Be smart and you might walk away." Terror flooded her, sharp and cold, and through it a single clear thought cut like a blade. The card. She had no way to reach it now, no way to call the number, but she remembered the man in the diner with the cold smile, remembered Mateo's warning, and she understood that everything he had feared was happening. Then out of nowhere the night changed. Headlights swept across the street. A car came around the corner far too fast, tires screaming, and stopped hard between Nora and the van. Doors opened. Men she did not recognize moved with terrible speed and purpose, and the 2 who held her were suddenly no longer holding her. There was shouting, and the sound of a struggle, and Nora found herself pulled free and pushed gently but firmly behind a broad shoulder. "Get her in the car," a familiar voice ordered, and Nora looked up to see Vince Palermo, the quiet man who had stood by the door in the diner. Everything happened in seconds. The men who had grabbed her scrambled back into their van and it roared away into the night. Nora was guided into the back seat of the car, shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and then the door closed and the city blurred past the window and she realized she was safe. or as safe as a person could be, sitting in a car belonging to the most feared man in the city. Mateo was waiting when the car pulled into an underground garage beneath a building she did not know. He opened the door himself, and the moment he saw her face, something in his own expression turned to stone. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was low and dangerous. "No," Nora managed. "No, I don't think so. They grabbed me. They were going to take me somewhere. They said they wanted to talk to me about you." A muscle worked in his jaw. He helped her from the car with a gentleness that seemed impossible in a man radiating such quiet fury, and he led her through a private elevator to a room high above the city. It was large and warm, full of soft light, with tall windows that looked out over a sea of glittering streets. He sat her down, poured her a glass of water, and knelt in front of her so that his eyes were level with hers. "Listen to me," he said. "You're safe now. No one can reach you here, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Every word they said, every face you saw. Can you do that?" Nora nodded, and slowly, haltingly, she told him. She told him about the man in the diner with the cold smile who had asked about a big man in a nice suit. She told him about the coins left too generously, the warning about a good memory and a bad one. She told him about the two men in the dark and the van and the words spoken against her ear. Mateo listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with every detail. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. "This is my fault," he said finally. "I brought this to your door. I told myself I could keep my world away from you, and I was a fool to believe it." "You saved me," Nora said. "Your man was there. How?" "Because I've had someone watching you since the night you helped me," he admitted, turning to face her. "I know how that sounds. I know it frightens you. But if Vince hadn't been close, you would be in that van right now, in a room I don't want to imagine, being asked questions until they were satisfied you had no more answers to give." His voice dropped. "And people like the ones hunting me are never quickly satisfied." Nora wrapped her arms around herself. The full weight of it was settling over her now, the reality of the danger, the understanding that her ordinary life had ended the moment she opened that back door. "Who are they?" she asked. "The ones after you." Mateo studied her for a long moment, then seemed to decide she had earned the truth. "A man named Aldo Bianchi," he said. "He runs a rival family. For years there was a balance between us and understanding, but Bianchi grew greedy. He wants what I have, and he decided the fastest way to take it was to remove me." His jaw tightened. "The night you found me, his men had cornered me. I got away barely, and I let them believe they might have finished the job. It bought me time to learn who I could trust. But now Bianchi knows I'm alive, and he knows someone helped me." "And he has found you." "So I'm bait," Nora said quietly. "A way to get to you." "Yes," he did not soften it. "You are the one weakness they've found. And I will not let them use you." He crossed the room and stood before her. "You can't go back to your apartment, not yet, not until this is finished. You'll stay here where I can keep you safe. I know it's not what you want. I know you value your independence more than anything. But I'm asking you to trust me just for a little while." Nora looked up at him. Everything about her life told her to refuse, to insist on going home, to reclaim the small, careful world she had built. But she had felt the hands on her in the dark. She had heard the words against her ear, and she knew that pride would not protect her from men like that. "All right," she said, "for a little while." Something in his shoulders eased, though only slightly. The days that followed were strange in a way Nora could never have predicted. She had expected to feel like a prisoner in Mateo Rizzo's world, watched and confined, surrounded by hard men and colder silences. Instead, she found herself slowly seeing the man beneath the name. He was gone often, tending to matters she did not ask about and he did not explain. But in the evenings he returned and he began, at first stiffly and then more easily, to talk with her. He asked about her life, about the diner, about the dream of nursing she had given up. He listened the way few people ever had, with his full attention, as if what she said mattered. She was not entirely alone in the days when he was gone. There were others in Mateo's world who moved through the building, and one of them, a smooth young man named Gio Rixay, seemed to appear more often than the rest. He was polite to her, almost too polite, with an easy charm and a ready smile. He brought her coffee, made small jokes, asked her gentle questions about how she was settling in, about the diner, about how she had come to know Mateo at all. "It's quite a story, isn't it?" Gio said one afternoon, leaning in the doorway. "A woman like you, pulling the boss out of the gutter. He's not an easy man to impress, and you seem to have done it without even trying." "I didn't do anything special," Nora said. "I helped someone who was hurt. Anyone would have." "No," Gio said, and his smile did not quite reach his eyes. "Not anyone." "That's the point." He studied her a moment longer than felt comfortable, then pushed off the doorframe. "He trusts you. That's rare. He doesn't trust many people, not even the ones who have earned it." There was something in the way he said it that stayed with Nora after he left, a faint sourness beneath the charm, like the first hint of milk gone bad. She told herself she was being unfair, that living among dangerous men had made her suspicious of everyone. But she found herself watching Gio Rix a little more closely after that, and being a little more careful with what she said around him. Vince, by contrast, said almost nothing at all. He was a wall of quiet loyalty, always somewhere near, his eyes always moving. He did not warm to her the way Gio pretended to, but she trusted him far more. When she asked him once plainly whether she was safe, he had looked at her for a long moment and said, "As long as I'm breathing, no one gets to you." And she had believed him completely. One night he came home very late, long after she had expected him, and she could tell at once that something had gone wrong. His face was drawn and gray, and there was a weariness in him that went deeper than the body. He did not speak. He crossed to the window and stood staring out at the city, his shoulders set like a man carrying a great weight. Nora did not ask what had happened. She remembered the rules from that first night. No questions. Instead, she went to the small kitchen, heated a bowl of soup, and set it beside him without a word, the way she had in the diner, the way she would for anyone who looked as tired as he did. He turned and looked at the bowl, then at her, and something in his hard face cracked. "You don't even know what I did tonight," he said quietly. "No," Nora agreed. "And I'm not asking. You looked like you needed something warm, that's all this is." For a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then he sat and he ate, and some of the gray left his face. When he finished, he looked at her across the small table with an expression she had never seen on him before, something raw and almost grateful. "In my whole life," he said, "no one has ever taken care of me, not once. I've been feared. I've been obeyed, I've been used, but no one ever just made sure I ate." He shook his head slowly. "You keep doing that, and you have no idea what it does to a man like me." "Everyone deserves to be looked after," Nora said softly. "Even you, especially you maybe." He did not answer, but he reached across the table briefly and covered her hand with his, and neither of them pulled away. And little by little, she drew more pieces of Mateo's own story out of him. He had grown up poor, poorer than she had, in a part of the city no one wanted to remember. He had been a boy who learned early that the world showed mercy to no one, that the only way to survive was to become harder than the things that threatened you. He had built his empire from nothing, brick by brick, and every brick had cost him a piece of himself. Somewhere along the way, he told her one quiet evening, he had forgotten what it felt like to simply talk to another person without wondering what they wanted from him. "That's why I came back to your diner," he said. They were sitting by the tall windows, the city spread out below them like scattered jewels. "You looked at me like I was a man, not a name, not a thing to be feared or used, just a man who was hurt. I hadn't been looked at that way in more years than I can count." "You're still that man," Nora said, "underneath all of it. I saw him that night in the rain, and I see him now." He looked at her, and for a moment the guardedness fell away completely, and what was left was startlingly young and lonely and unsure. "You shouldn't be able to see me at all," he said softly. "No one else can. Maybe no one else ever tried." The silence between them changed then, grew warm and heavy with something neither of them named. Nora was aware of how close he sat, of the way the light caught the lines of his face, of the strange truth that she felt safer beside the most dangerous man in the city than she had felt anywhere in years. She should have been afraid of that. Instead, she found herself drawn toward him, in a way that frightened her more than any enemy in the dark. She thought of the empire he ran, the violence woven through his life, the things he had surely done that she would never want to know. She thought of how impossible it was, how foolish, for a diner waitress to feel her heart pulling toward a man like this. And yet the loneliness she saw in him answered something lonely in herself, and she could not make herself look away. "This is a mistake," she whispered, though she did not move. "Probably," he agreed, and neither did he. For a long moment they simply sat there close, the space between them alive with everything unspoken. Then Matteo drew a slow breath and rose, putting distance between them with what looked like real effort. "You should rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "It's late." Nora nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched him walk to the door, and there he paused, one hand on the frame. "Nora," he did not turn around. "The kindest thing I could do for you would be to send you as far from me as possible when this is over. I want you to know that I know that." Then he was gone, and Nora sat alone by the window, her heart aching in a way she did not have words for. She did not know that even as they had spoken, the walls were closing tighter. She did not know that Bianch's reach went further than Matteo feared, or that the traitor Matteo had sent Vince to hunt was closer to the center than either of them imagined. She did not know that her attempted capture had not been a failure in Bianch's eyes, but a message, a way to prove that Matteo Rizzo had something he cared about, something that could be taken. She only knew that she had come to this room a frightened captive, and that she was beginning, dangerously, to feel like she belonged there. And she knew that the man who had promised to keep her safe was the same man whose enemies would stop at nothing to reach her. Two worlds had collided in an alley in the rain, and there was no pulling them apart now. "Pack your things, you're leaving tonight." The words hit Nora like cold water. She had come into the room smiling, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and found Matteo standing rigid by the window with a stranger's face, hard and closed and distant, all the warmth of the past days wiped away as if it had never been. "What?" she said. Leaving where?" "Away from here, away from me." He would not look at her. "Vince has arranged a place in another city. New name, new life, enough money to start over. You'll be safe there. You'll never have to think about any of this again." Nora set the coffee down carefully because her hands had begun to shake. "You're sending me away." "I'm doing what should have been done from the start." His voice was flat, mechanical, as if he had rehearsed it. "You were right that first night in the diner. You wanted nothing to do with my world. I should have respected that. Instead, I dragged you deeper into it, and now you're a target because of me. The only way to make you safe is to put you somewhere I can't reach, and neither can my enemies." "So that's it," Nora said. "You've decided. You didn't think to ask me." "There's nothing to ask." He turned, finally, and his eyes were cold, deliberately cold. "Did you imagine this was something more than survival? You're a waitress who bandaged a wound. I'm grateful. I've repaid it. That's the whole of it. Don't make it into something it isn't." The cruelty of it took her breath away, and for a moment she almost believed him. Almost, but she had seen his hand cover hers across a small table. She had watched a hard man's face crack open at a bowl of soup. She had heard him say that no one had ever taken care of him, and she had felt the truth of it in her bones. "You're lying," she said quietly. Matteo went still. "You're trying to make me hate you so I'll leave without a fight," Nora went on, stepping closer, her voice steadier now. You think if you're cruel enough I'll go and you can tell yourself it was for my own good. But I've spent my whole life reading people, remember? And I'm reading you right now. You don't want me to go. You're terrified something will happen to me, and you'd rather break your own heart than risk mine." For a long moment he said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged, and the cold mask fell away, and what was underneath was worse because it was real. "Of course I don't want you to go," he said, his voice rough. "Do you think this is easy for me? I have spent every day since that alley learning what it feels like to have something to lose. I had forgotten. I made myself forget because a man in my position can't afford it. And then you walked back into my life with your soup and your stubborn kindness, and now the thought of anything happening to you is the only thing in the world that frightens me." He pressed a hand to his eyes. "That's exactly why you have to leave. Because as long as you're near me, you are the one thing my enemies can use to destroy me. And I will not let them destroy you to do it." "Then let me choose," Nora said. "It's my life. Let me choose whether it's worth the risk." "You don't understand the risk." "Then tell me. Stop deciding for me and tell me the truth." Matteo looked at her for a long moment, and then, with the air of a man setting down a burden he had carried too long, he told her. The situation was worse than she knew. Bianchi was not merely circling anymore. He had begun to move openly, testing Matteo's territory, turning men, spreading fear. And the traitor Matteo had hunted for weeks had grown bolder, feeding Bianchi not just information but opportunities, arranging for Matteo's protection to be thin at exactly the wrong moments. The attempt in the alley, the men who had grabbed Nora, the strangers who had appeared just where they should not have been, all of it pointed to one terrible truth. Someone inside Matteo's own house was working to bring it all down, and that someone knew about Nora. "I trust 3 people in the world," Matteo said. "Vince, and you, that's 2. His mouth twisted. "I used to think I could count more. I was wrong. Somewhere among the men I've fed and protected and made rich, there is one who has decided I'm worth more dead. And until I find him, everyone around me is in danger, especially the people I care about." Nora's mind went, unbidden, to a smooth young face and a smile that never reached the eyes. To Gio Rixai, appearing more often than he should, asking his careful questions, watching her a beat too long. "Matteo," she said slowly, "the men who tried to take me, they knew my route home, they knew exactly when I'd be there. Who could have known that?" He frowned. "Only a handful of my people knew where you lived. Vince kept it close." "And Gio Rixai?" Matteo went very still. "Why do you say his name?" "Because he's been asking me questions since the day I got here," Nora said. "About how I know you, about whether you trust me, about things that have nothing to do with keeping me safe. I told myself I was being paranoid, but he's always around and there's something under his smile that I don't like. Vince never asks me anything. Gio never stops." Matteo's face had turned to stone, but not the cold, distant stone he had shown her earlier. This was something sharper, more focused, the look of a man watching a puzzle rearrange itself into a picture he did not want to see. "Gio has been with me for 6 years, he said slowly. "He came up under one of my oldest captains. He handles the accounts, the movements, the schedules." His voice dropped. "The schedules. He would know where everyone is, when protection thins, when a man might be caught alone in an alley in the rain." "You didn't suspect him," Nora said. "Because he was charming, because he was useful, because he made himself easy to trust." "That is exactly how a wise traitor works," Matteo said quietly. He crossed the room in 3 strides and picked up his phone. "Vince, come up, now, and say nothing to anyone on your way." He set it down and looked at Nora, and there was something new in his eyes, a fierce and grim gratitude. "You may have just seen what I could not. I've been looking outward at Bianchi, at my enemies. I never thought to look at the man bringing me my coffee." "I could be wrong," Nora said. "You could be. We'll find out." He came to her then and took both her hands in his. "But whether you're right or wrong about Gio, you were right about the other thing. I have no business deciding your life for you. If you tell me you want the safety of that new city and that new name, I will let you go, and I will spend the rest of my life glad you're alive somewhere out of my reach. But if you're asking me whether I want you to stay—" He paused, and his voice grew unsteady. "I have never wanted anything more." Nora looked up at him, at this man the whole city feared, holding her hands as if they were the only solid thing in a shifting world. "Then I'm staying," she said. "I didn't help you in that alley so I could run away the moment it got hard. I'm not going anywhere. We finish this together." Something broke open in his face, relief and fear, and a helpless kind of tenderness all at once. He lifted one of her hands and pressed it to his lips, briefly, and it was the gentlest thing she had ever seen a dangerous man do. Vince arrived within minutes. Matteo laid it out for him in low, rapid words, and Nora watched the old soldier's expression darken as the pieces fit together for him too. Vince had never liked Gio, it turned out. He had simply never had a reason to act on it. "If it's him," Vince said grimly, "he won't just be feeding Bianchi scraps. A man that close, that trusted, he'll be arranging something big, something to end it all at once." "Then we don't move against him yet," Matteo said. "Not until we know what he's planning. If we frighten him, he runs to Bianchi and they simply try again from the shadows. No, we watch him. We feed him false information and see where it travels. And when we know exactly what he intends, we take him and Bianchi together in one night and finish this for good." "That's a dangerous game," Vince said. "One wrong step and it's you who ends, not them." "I know," Matteo's eyes moved to Nora, "but I have something to protect now, and I've learned that a man protecting something fights differently than a man protecting nothing." Over the next days, a quiet trap was built. Matteo let it be known, through careful channels that ran past Gio, that he would be moving to a certain property on a certain night with only a small guard to meet with a supposed ally. It was bait, and it was designed to be irresistible. If Gio was the traitor, he would pass the opportunity to Bianchi, and Bianchi would come to finish what the alley had started, and Matteo would be ready. The false information was released on a Tuesday. By Wednesday night, Vince had his answer. He came to Matteo's rooms with a grim satisfaction in his eyes and a small recorder in his hand. He had put a man on Gio, a quiet watcher who knew how to follow without being seen, and that watcher had followed Gio to a parking structure on the edge of the city, where the young man had met a car with darkened windows and spoken to whoever sat inside for 11 minutes. "It's Bianchi's car," Vince said flatly. "One of them, we've seen it before." Gio walked right up to it like he'd done it 100 times, because he has. He set the recorder down. "We couldn't get the words, but we got enough. He passed the property location, the time, the size of the guard, everything you told him and nothing you didn't. It's him, Matteo. It was always him." Matteo stood very still, and Nora saw the pain move across his face before the anger did. 6 years. A man he had made rich. A man he had trusted with his schedules and his secrets. A man who had brought him coffee and smiled his easy smile. 6 years, Matteo said quietly, echoing her thought. "I built him up from nothing. I gave him a place at my table." "And he sold it to the man who wants you in the ground," Vince said. "For money, or power, or maybe just because some men can't stand being second to anyone." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter why. What matters is he thinks the meeting tomorrow night is real. He's told Bianchi you'll be lightly guarded, and Bianchi believes he's finally caught you in the open." Nora spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. "Then he's walking into exactly what he thinks he's setting up." "Yes," Matteo said. His eyes came to rest on her and some of the pain eased. "You saw him when I couldn't. If you hadn't spoken his name, I'd have walked into that meeting believing I was safe, and I'd have died wondering how they knew. You didn't just save my life in that alley, Nora. You've saved it twice now." "Then let's make it the last time you need saving," she said. Nora watched it all take shape with a knot of dread in her stomach. She thought often in those tense days of the woman she had been just weeks earlier, the tired waitress worrying about rent and sore feet, whose biggest fear had been an eviction notice on her door. That woman felt like a stranger now. She had crossed into a world she had never imagined, a world of traitors and rival families and traps laid in the dark, and the strangest part was that she did not regret it. She was frightened, yes, but she was not sorry. Because in this world she had found something the ordinary one had never given her. She had found a person who saw her, truly saw her, and whom she saw in return. She had spent years being invisible, pouring coffee for people who never looked at her face, doing small kindnesses that vanished into the noise of the city. And then a bleeding stranger in an alley had looked at her, as though she were the only real thing in the world, and nothing had been the same since. She understood now what she had chosen. She had chosen to stand beside a man walking willingly into the mouth of danger, using himself as the lure. She did not fully understand his world, and she never would. But she understood him, and she understood that he was doing this not only to save his empire, but to make a world where she could be safe. And she loved him for it, though she had not yet said the word aloud, even to herself. The night before the trap was to be sprung, she found him alone by the window again, watching the city. "If something goes wrong tomorrow," he began. "Nothing is going to go wrong," Nora said. "If it does," he pressed gently, "I want you to promise me you'll go with Vince and you won't look back. Whatever happens to me, you live. That's all I ask. That's the only thing I've ever asked of you that matters." Nora came and stood beside him and slipped her hand into his. "I'll make you a different promise," she said. "I promise that tomorrow night when it's over, you're going to come back to this room and I'm going to be here. And we're going to figure out what a man like you and a woman like me do with the rest of our lives. That's the promise I'm making. The other one I won't make, because I don't intend to need it." He turned to her, and in the glow of the city lights his face was full of something that looked almost like hope, a thing she suspected he had not felt in decades. "You are the bravest person I have ever known," he said. "No," Nora said softly. "I'm just someone who decided a long time ago not to walk past people who need help, even when the person is the most dangerous man in the city, even when helping him might cost me everything." He drew her close, and they stood together at the window, two people from two impossible worlds, watching the lights of the city that wanted them both destroyed. Somewhere out there, Gia Rixai was passing a message he believed would end his master. Somewhere out there, Aldo Bianchi was gathering his men, certain that victory was finally within reach. And in a warm room high above it all, a waitress and a crime boss held each other and prepared to gamble everything on a single night. The trap was set, the traitor was moving, and by this time tomorrow everything would be decided, one way or the other. The plan began to unravel at 9 minutes past midnight. Nora was not supposed to be anywhere near the property that night. She was supposed to be safe in the high room with a single guard, waiting for word. But an hour before Matteo left, a call had come that changed everything, and the careful trap had turned in an instant into a race. It was Vince who took the call, and his face went pale as he listened. When he hung up, his voice was tight. "Bianchi's smarter than we gave him credit for," he said. "He didn't take the bait the way we planned. He's not sending men to the property. He knows it's a trap. Gio tipped him." Matteo went cold. "Gio warned him. Then Gio knows we suspect him." "Worse," Vince said. "Gio's covering himself. He told Bianchi the meeting was a setup and offered him something better instead, a prize that would hurt you more than any ambush." His eyes moved terribly to Nora. "He told Bianchi where she is." The room seemed to tilt. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. The one place she had believed was safe, the high room above the city, was safe no longer. Gio had known where she was all along, and he had handed her to the enemy as a final, spiteful blow. "They're coming here," Matteo breathed. "They're already close," Vince said. "The man watching the street called it in. 2 cars, Bianch's people. What happened next happened fast. Mateo did not panic, and later Nora would think that was the most frightening thing of all, the way his fear for her simply hardened into pure, focused purpose. He gave orders in a low, steady voice. He sent men to the stairs and the garage. He took Nora by the shoulders and looked into her eyes. "Listen to me," he said. "Vince is going to take you out the back way through the service passages. There's a car waiting. You go with him and you don't stop no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" "Come with us," Nora said. "Please don't stay here." "I can't. If I run, they chase and they catch us on the road where I can't protect you. If I stay, I hold them here and you get away. That's the only version of this where you live." He pressed his forehead briefly to hers. "I told you once the kindest thing I could do was send you away. This is me finally doing it. Go, live, be everything you were before I walked into your life." "I'm not leaving you," Nora said, tears in her eyes. "I promised you I'd be here when it was over. I meant it." "Nora." "No," she gripped his jacket. "You've spent your whole life deciding you have to face everything alone. Not this time. If we run together. If we stay together. But I am not getting into a car and driving away while you face this by yourself. That's not who I am." "You know it's not." For a heartbeat he stared at her, torn between the need to save her and the impossible, stubborn love of her. And in that heartbeat, Vince made the decision for both of them. "Then we all move," Vince said sharply. "Now, down the service stairs, out through the old delivery entrance. They'll expect the garage. They won't know the back way, but we have 30 seconds, so move." They moved. What followed was the longest few minutes of Nora's life. Vince led them down a narrow concrete stairwell, Mateo's hand locked around hers, the sounds of the building above them growing chaotic as Bianch's men reached the upper floors and found the rooms empty. Down and down they went, past storage rooms and humming machinery, until Vince pushed open a heavy door and cold night air rushed in. An alley, another alley. Nora thought wildly where it had all begun. A plain car sat waiting at the end of it. They ran for it, and they almost made it. A figure stepped out from between 2 parked cars, blocking the way, and Nora's heart stopped. It was Gio Rixai. His easy smile was gone. In its place was something ugly and desperate, the face of a man who had gambled everything and needed it to pay. "Going somewhere," Gio said. "I don't think so. Bianchi wants the boss alive, and he wants the girl. I intend to give him both." 6 years, Gio, Mateo said quietly, stepping in front of Nora. "I trusted you like a son." "Why?" "Because you were never going to give me anything real," Gio spat. "Always the boss, always the great Mateo Rizzo, and the rest of us just pieces you moved around. Bianchi offered me my own place, my own name, everything you kept for yourself." His voice shook. "I'm done being second." "You were never second," Mateo said. "You were family, and you sold us all for a promise from a man who will discard you the moment you stop being useful." For a moment something flickered in Gio's face, doubt or shame or the memory of the man who had lifted him out of nothing. But it passed, and his jaw set. "It's too late for that," he said. "Bianchi's men are already inside. There's nowhere for you to go, just make it easy." That was when Vince moved. Nora never saw exactly what happened, only that Vince, who had been standing so still, was suddenly not still at all, crossing the space between them faster than a man his size should have been able to. There was a brief, sharp struggle, and then Gio was on the ground, disarmed and gasping, Vince's knee pinning him, and the way to the car was clear. "Go," Vince said, not even breathing hard. "I'll bring him. Bianch is going to want to see the face of the man who failed him. Go now before the rest come down." They ran. They reached the car. Mateo pushed Nora inside and slid in beside her, and Vince, hauling a stumbling Gio, threw the traitor into the front and took the wheel, and the car surged out of the alley into the night just as figures began pouring from the building behind them. The city blurred past. Nora clung to Mateo's hand and did not let go. Behind them, no headlights followed. Ahead, the streets opened up, empty and dark and full of escape. "Where are we going?" she managed. "Somewhere Bianchi can't follow," Mateo said, "and then I'm going to end this. Tonight for good." He made calls as they drove, low and rapid, and Nora understood that even as they fled, he was drawing his own forces together, the men truly loyal to him, gathering them toward the one confrontation that would settle everything. Gio's betrayal had ruined the trap, but it had also done something else. It had brought Bianchi's people out into the open, away from their strongholds, chasing a prize that was already gone. And a man like Mateo, even off balance, even afraid, knew how to turn a chase into a reckoning. The confrontation, when it came, did not happen the way Nora had feared. There was no dark warehouse, no terrible violence for her to witness. Mateo would not allow her near it, and this time she did not argue, because she understood at last that some parts of his world truly were not hers to enter. Vince took her to a safe place, a quiet house far from the city center, and there she waited through the longest night of her life, not knowing whether the man she loved would come back to her or not. She learned the rest only later, in pieces. That Mateo had used everything Gio had given away against Bianchi. That he had turned the traitor's own information inside out, feeding Bianchi into a position from which there was no escape. That when the two men finally faced each other, it was Mateo who held every card, and Bianchi who realized, too late, that the prize he had chased all night had led him into ruin. There was a confrontation. There were words she was never told. And in the end, although Bianchi's grip on the city was broken completely, his people scattered, his threat undone. Mateo had won, not with more violence, but by being in the final measure the smarter and steadier man. The waiting nearly broke her. The safe house was small and warm, but every minute stretched into an hour, and every distant sound made her heart leap. She paced. She sat. She stood at the window watching an empty road. She thought of all the things she had never said to him, all the ordinary conversations they might never have, and she made bargains with the dark, promising anything if only he would come back through that door. The one guard Vince had left with her, a quiet older man named Rourke, tried to reassure her. "He knows what he's doing, miss," Rourke said. "I've seen him walk out of worse than this. If any man alive can end it clean tonight, it's him." "And if he can't?" Nora asked. Rourke did not answer, which was an answer of its own, and Nora went back to the window. She thought about how strange it was, that she should be standing in a stranger's house in the dead of night, terrified for the life of the most dangerous man in the city. Weeks ago she would have laughed at the idea. Now it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Somewhere out there, everything was being decided, and she could do nothing but wait and hope and refuse to imagine the worst. Once, near 3 in the morning, a phone rang, and she nearly stopped breathing. Rourke answered it, listened, and gave a single short nod before hanging up. "That was Vince," he said. "It's turning their way. The boss has Bianchi cornered. It's not over yet, but it's turning." He almost smiled. "Hold on a while longer, miss. He's coming home." Nora sank into a chair and covered her face and let herself cry, quietly, with relief that was not yet safe to feel but which she could not hold back any longer. Gio Rixai was handled too, in whatever way that world handled such things. Nora did not ask, and Mateo never said, and she came to accept that there were doors in his life she would choose never to open. It was enough for her to know that the danger was gone, that the traitor could hurt no one else, and that the man who had sold them all had failed in the one thing he had staked his life on. Dawn was breaking when the car finally returned to the quiet house. Nora had not slept. She stood at the window as the sky turned gray and then pale gold, and when she saw the headlights coming up the long drive, she was out the door before the car had fully stopped. Mateo stepped out, weary and marked by the night but whole, alive, and the sight of him standing there in the morning light broke something loose in her chest. She ran to him, and he caught her, and for a long moment they simply held each other in the growing light, neither of them able to speak. "You came back," she finally whispered. "I made you a promise once," he said into her hair. "You'd be waiting when it was over. I wasn't going to let you be there alone." He drew back just enough to look at her, and his hard, weathered face was open in a way she had never seen. "It's over, Nora. Bianchi is finished. Gio is finished. No one is hunting you anymore. No one is hunting me. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm free. We're free." Nora's eyes filled. "So what happens now?" Matteo was quiet for a moment. Then he did something she had never seen the most feared man in the city do. He stepped back, and he lowered himself, and there in the gravel drive with the sun coming up, he took her hand in both of his and looked up at her with everything laid bare. "Now I give you a choice," he said. "The real one, not money, not protection, not the debt of a life you saved, just me exactly as I am. A man with a hard past and blood under his history and no right at all to ask for someone as good as you." His voice caught. "I'm going to step back from the worst of that world. I've already begun. There are people who can carry the weight I've carried, and I've spent enough of my life in the dark. I want to build something else, something clean. And I want to build it with you if you'll have me, but only if you choose it, freely, the way you do everything." Nora looked down at this man, this powerful, lonely, broken, and mending man, kneeling in the dawn light and asking her not to save him, not to serve him, but simply to love him. And she thought of the rainy night when she had knelt beside a bleeding stranger and chosen kindness, not knowing it would lead here, not knowing it would give her the one thing her small, careful life had never held. "I chose you the moment I opened that back door," she said, and she drew him up to his feet. "I just didn't know it yet. Yes, Matteo. Of course it's yes." He kissed her then, in the gold morning light, and the city that had feared him and hunted them both lay quiet and distant below. And for the first time in either of their lives, the danger was truly behind them. In the months that followed, the city changed, though most people never understood why. The most feared name in its shadows grew quiet. The empire that had ruled its dark corners loosened its grip, passed into steadier and less bloody hands, faded from the whispers that had once carried it. Some said Matteo Rizzo had lost his edge. Others said he had simply disappeared. Only a few ever knew the truth, that a man the whole city had feared had been changed, completely and forever, by a tired waitress who had shown him compassion when she thought he was no one at all. They built the clean thing he had promised. It was not grand, and it did not need to be. There was a small house, and a garden Nora planted with her own hands, and mornings that began without fear. Matteo, who had never in his life known peace, learned it slowly, the way a man learns a language late, clumsy at first and then fluent. And Nora, who had spent so long walking past no one who needed help, finally had someone to look after who looked after her just as fiercely in return. Sometimes on quiet evenings they would sit together and remember the night it all began. The rain, the alley, the bleeding stranger, and the waitress who would not walk past him. "You should have run," he told her once, smiling. "Any sensible person would have run." "I know," Nora said, leaning against him. "Aren't you glad I never learned how?" And Matteo Rizzo, who had once been the most feared man in the entire city, held the woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved, and knew that the only truly dangerous thing he had ever encountered was the kindness of a stranger in the rain. It had cost him his old life. It had given him a real one, and he would not have traded it for the world.